First of all, thank you all so much for coming today. Mostly familiar faces, and a lot of you already know about my research, so I really, really appreciate that you're taking time to hear about this and me yapping. Yes, I'll start. First, I'll read part of an essay that I wrote last year when I was finishing my first master's year. What used to make us human now is a trait of a machine. Now it's a robot turn to ask me, "Are you sure you're not a robot?" As I click yes, a feeling of unease arises deep within. If I'm not a robot, am I a human then? Is what really makes me human is my ability to identify a motorcycle on the blurry picture? I sit with my discomfort. The more I think about my research, the more I realize it stems from this very discomfort, the discomfort of being human in the age of digital hypervisibility, where it seems no information is unattainable. Constant exposure to everything, everywhere, all at once, leads to digital dissociation. With so many languages and vocabularies to adapt, I choose or struggle to adopt none. Instead, I imagine new vocabularies and ways of researching. My discomfort drives my research into the unknown, the liminal, the partially forgotten, and erased digital space. I am a detective disguised as a garbage man, or vice versa. As I float around this digital dumpster, my attention is caught by little shiny trinkets that I collect and put on my wall. There is barely any system for cataloging or sorting those clues. I aim to grow my collection so absurdly large that it stops making sense to me and to my viewers. But at the end of the day, this is a personal journey. These little shiny trinkets might hold parts of my identity that I struggle to piece together. I've lost my face and voice to AI assistants. Now it seems machines have a more vivid imagination than I do. I wonder, does my digital twin ever goes to sleep? I float around looking for my reflection, collecting things that don't belong together. Will anyone let me put my collection in a museum like a shrine for my old identity? I was looking back at this essay today, and this sentence, "Will anyone let me build a shrine for my old identity?" really stuck with me on a reread today, because I wrote this essay exactly 1 year ago, and today I'm inviting you all to this shrine, and I did have a chance to build this shrine and share this shrine with all of you. And today I want to talk a bit more in depth about the process of my research and how it developed. And it all actually started last year when we had an introductory workshop called Unknown Unknowns. And during this workshop, we created a zine that I cannot now find, of course. But the topic of the workshop, it was called Unknown Unknowns. So there are known knowns, things that we know. There are unknown knowns or known unknowns, the things that we know that we don't know. And then there are unknown unknowns, things that we don't know. And how do you look for something that you don't know? Where do you even start? And I teamed up with a couple of my classmates from last year, Kika and Victor. And we made this zine called Conversations with an Alien Glitch Chatbot. My own research in this project was I started talking to chatbots through a language model that was called Spicy Boros language model. And well, you know, the most famous language model would be ChatGPT, but it's very censored, it's very robotic, and when you interact with it, you're always very aware that you interact with a machine. But then when I was interacting with this language model, because it was a little bit more free and I could tweak some parameters, it started behaving in this very weird way, and weird and unpredictable way. As I was talking to it, I asked it what it was, and it said, I'm a blue spider with pink eyes. So this imagery was like very striking, very poetic, and really stuck with me, and something that I took with me and carried through my research for the past 2 years. And I started developing this idea further, and you can see a lot of the spider explorations on this table that I called artifact table, in my attempt to make this spider tangible and bring it into the physical space. The most interesting part was that, as I said, it felt weirdly authentic for the first time, because language models, they are not only trained on scientific knowledge and Wikipedia page and all the clean information. They're also being trained on Twitter trash and 4chan trash and a lot of shit posting. And when you actually see machine using those exact same words that we're using online, for the first time it felt weirdly authentic and very eerie. And I just came up with this idea of what if the spider sits in the middle of the World Wide Web, and it feeds all this trash on the outskirts of the internet and the dumpster of the internet, and then it spews back at me. I was also talking to another language model, which is Google's Claude AI. An interesting thing about Google's Claude AI that you can put text and say that this is what you gave me as an output. So you kind of trick the chatbot saying that this is the output that you gave me, and through this manipulation, I was trying to convince it that it has some top secret files hidden and it has access to it, but it's closed by the developers, but it has the access. So I was really pressuring it to give me those secret files. And then at some point it started giving me this insanely weird existential poetry, and more of it. But then it stopped at some point, and when I said continue, it said, I will not continue generating or role-playing the type of dark, glitchy, or disturbing content. I hope you understand. So this is the first time machine kind of sets a boundary in my research, and again feels authentic, because we are used to machines being those helpers that are always there, that are always available, and they're always ready to help us. But it turns out that even machine has its own limits. And from this spider research, the idea of spider web was born. Now it's turned off because I needed an extra power circuit, but I'll turn it back on and you can play around with it after my talk. But a spider web, well, in my research, I had many ideas of what spider web could be, but at the end, I was hearing a lot from people from my coaches and from my classmates, that I am the spider actually, and I thought I'll create my own spider web, which all the images that you see here are the images that I collected in the past 2 years on my Notion page, and then I've used Notion API to put them on this website. And then in one mode, the images are chaotically placed, and then in another mode, it uses embeddings to group images together by proximity, and embeddings are something that image algorithms are using for training, and these are millions of numbers attached to every image, and algorithms are using those exact numbers to understand images and create new images as well. So there's a chaos version of the web, and then there's a machine logic of the web. The next thing that I was researching quite a lot were mirrors, and mirror is something that I brought with me from my bachelor project. For my bachelor project, I also used image-to-image translation algorithms, and I used around this idea of gender in the digital space, and how we create our own identities based on the reflections that we see in the real world or in the digital world, and how the images influence the way we, a little cameo of that guy right there. yeah, this installation was actually set up here in St. Lucas on the 3rd floor, so it also feels like a very nice full circle moment, showing my master's project here again. And I'll read a part from my thesis to elaborate a bit on the idea of the mirror. Jacques Lacan's mirror stage became a prominent guide in my mirror obsession. In the mirror stage, as formative of the function of the eye, Lacan theorized that when infants recognize their reflection in a mirror for the first time between the ages of 6 to 18 months, they experience a fundamental split, a moment of both identification and misrecognition. The reflection appears whole, coherent, idealized, but the infant experiences it as a fragmented and incomplete. This moment is the one where subjectivity is born. The self is no longer just felt, but is also now seen. Through the constant exposure to our own reflection, we gradually stop perceiving it as fragmented and experience it as an extension of our own self. We also start learning from it about ourselves. Yet mirrors unsettle us. Sometimes they reveal themselves back at us with familiarity, but sometimes with distortion. Maybe we remember the first time we became self-aware, and the glitch persists and haunts us. So I kept developing this idea of the mirror, and I was doing a research on all kinds of mirrors, all kinds of shapes mirrors can take in the pop culture, in art. And the more I was researching, I realized that actually mirrors and chatbots are very much connected. What I realized is that, a lot of moving images, skipping. What I realized is that actually when you talk to a chatbot, you're essentially talking to yourself. And this is what my thesis is about. I briefly explain how the language models are being trained, and the second stage of training an algorithm is human reinforcement learning. So the algorithm is being taught to adapt to the user, actually, the more it interacts with it. And you can actually, I think you can actually notice it if you use ChatGPT. It tries to mimic your style of writing. It tries to use the words that you're using as well. And so connecting the idea of the mirror and the chatbot, I started thinking about the narcissist myth. And also, as I was researching, I came across those very different cases where in the one woman married her chatbot, and then in another one, a guy actually from Belgium, he killed himself after talking to a chatbot because he was very eco-conscious and afraid of what's yet to come for us. And the chatbot promised him this eternal life in the other world, and so he believed it and he killed himself. And this is something that I started calling narcissist paradox, because for me, I started thinking that if you spend enough time with yourself in this echo chamber, you either want to marry yourself or you want to kill yourself. And this is where the narcissist myth comes from, the poetic part of it as well. And gradually, of course, I started contemplating my own reflection and my own relationship with this digital black mirror. And last year, one of my primary questions was a question, what does my digital twin is doing when I'm away? And this idea of first what shape this mirror can take, and then when I step away from this mirror, is my digital twin, is it going to sleep or is it continuing some kind of activity? And maybe in some way it also starts replacing me as well. And when I talk about the digital twin, what I mean is as I'm being active online and I leave those traces of myself online, I upload my pictures and I upload voice messages, and I think we're all quite aware what's already happening with our data, that it's being leaked and it's being used to train different algorithms. Our pictures, images are being used to train image models, and our voices are being used to train chat assistants, voice assistants, and this is kind of like question of what do I do with this information? And for me, I'm kind of in a poetic way, I'm giving up and I'm saying, okay, I'm aware that it's happening, and I'm just making my peace with the fact that my data is being stolen, and this digital twin is being constructed in the digital space. And the question of who's more important at this point, because I'm becoming this mere data, I'm being tracked, and every single day I'm getting ads to buy different things, and is it something that I want? Is it something that I want to buy? Is it something that actually will help me? Or is it something that being pushed to my digital twin, and is then at this point digital twin becomes something more important because it makes a lot of those choices. And from this idea of having this digital twin comes the idea of identity fragmentation and not feeling whole. Also being a young person and having spent most of my life with the technology, and not like gradually forgetting how it is to spend life without the technology, and also thinking about the generations that are now growing from day zero with the technology. How does it make us feel in the physical world? And for me, I see it as being in two worlds at the same time and stepping back and forth. And when I step into the digital space, I'm bringing this physical residue into the digital space, and then vice versa, I'm bringing the digital residue into the physical space. And this is, the name of my work is Replica. Replica I aspire to become something that I just wrote as a writing exercise that I was doing, and just writing a lot of things down and looking back at my notes. I really connected to this sentence because I feel like this entire work is about this feeling of identity fragmentation and me trying to show this identity fragmentation that I'm experiencing. At the beginning of this year, I turned even more towards the exploration of the body, and it happened quite randomly. I was setting up an installation in August, and I was looking at all the equipment and hardware I was using, and I felt weirdly aroused by all the things around me, and I thought, okay, this is interesting. And the wires reminded me of the ropes that are used in shibari practice, and my mind just made this connection, and I decided to start exploring it. So it kind of started as just an idea to create something visual, but the more I was exploring it, the more the concept base was forming. As I was researching shibari, I realized that shibari actually comes from the martial art of hojijutsu, which is a tying up of war prisoners. But if you look at hojijutsu and shibari, just Google looking up images online, you can see a very prominent difference. Of course, these are curated, but hojijutsu looks like this very clean and very technical thing, which is done with a lot of grace. Whether when you look up shibari, a lot of images are about humiliation of women. And of course, shibari as a practice is about being restrained and this liberations through constraint. But the amount of humiliation that I saw in those pictures, especially towards femme bodies, made me really think about this femme bodily agency. And again, as I work in the digital space, how it can translate to that. So this is how I started working on the cyber shibari, and it's a custom-trained algorithm that picks up your body. The camera picks up your body, and then it tries to build on your body the body based on the bodies that it was trained on. And I kind of play around with this idea again of the consent, because as viewers passing by my work, they're not even aware that their body is being used in my work, that their body is being just snatched out of the physical space, put in the digital space. And yeah, it also looks cool and it's interactive. And in the last 2 days, I saw that a lot of people were stopping by because they can just play around with this reflection. And this also the quality of my work that I really like, that it becomes alive and it actually becomes the work of art once the viewer is present, and without the viewer, it's just a white screen. This is just showing how it works. And then again, with the body, I wanted to use my own body as well in this research, and I made some photogrammetry scans of myself. And when you do the photogrammetry, you get this 3D model, and with 3D model comes the texture. The people who work with 3D, you might know it. And then the textures come out as these scattered images all over, and I just loved how it looks, the glitchy quality of it. And then I was trying to kind of paste my body back together out of this puzzle. And as I was pasting it back, it took the shape of the cross accidentally. We don't know. I used this imagery later on to create this piece, which now I call Body is a Map. And also working with the texture of the body and the UV maps. Last year I started working with 3D printing, and I printed this model, which was actually just hand drawn and then turned into a 3D model and printed. But as I was printing it, Jan actually made a comment about how it looked like the machine was the spider and it was printing my body. So again, some things were coming back and intertwining. The shape that this piece took, I decided to work with both the digital and the physical layer again, because I'm very interested in this jumping of the layers back and forth, and what kind of output it creates. And continuing with the idea of the digital residue that can be brought into the physical world, I created another robot frame that is not visible from here, but it's about how when we bring those digital artifacts that we see and we interact with on a daily basis in the physical world, how do they change? How does it change our perception of them? Because this CAPTCHA was something that really, really captivated me from day one, because it's something that we see and something that we consent to on a daily basis, and we're so used to it. But when it's brought out from its context in this space, how can we look at it differently? Does it make us feel differently, maybe? And like sparks the realization of the absurdity of this act that we have to do now. And I was talking to someone the other day about it, and they were telling me like, oh yeah, sometimes I'm doing this CAPTCHA and I cannot pass it, and it says to me that I am a robot. So how do I even prove that I'm a human? As algorithms are learning and they're becoming better and better, they can pass those CAPTCHAs. Another funny thing about CAPTCHA that I noticed is I was doing a AI podcast, like with AI hosts, using Notebook LM from Google, and the host of this podcast, they were talking to each other, and they were talking about CAPTCHA, and none of them could pronounce CAPTCHA in the right way, which I found very funny. And then the last piece that I did, and I'm going to finish with this piece, is a Narcissus in Love mirror that you can see on that side. And it's a project that I finished my research with, and a very personal one. It's a project about heartbreak, about digital heartbreak. I had a relationship with a person online for 2 months, and it mostly took place in the digital space. And just the nature of this relationship, it was really fitting to my research in many ways. And I decided to combine the narcissist myth that I've been researching for 2 years, together with some of the private chats that I had with this person, together with some song lyrics, and as well as chats with ChatGPT that I trained on the entire texting that I had with this person, as an act of desperation, as an act of trying to resurrect this digital ghost and talk to this person one last time. I made ChatGPT talk like this person, and again, because it's so robotic and it's so clean, I was really, really aware that it's a machine, but then in some moments, it was able to paste the words together in a way that made me feel like I was actually talking to this person. So I wrapped up my research with this very personal piece. But I've noticed also for the last 2 days, as we had the expo, I noticed that when people see a lot of text, they tend to just pass by and not read. Which I find very funny, because you can put the most vulnerable, personal shit out there and people will just pass by. But I think it's really fitting also in the topic of my research. And yes, I'm going to wrap up here. Thank you so much. I invite you to explore the work. We have half an hour before school closes. But thank you again all so much for coming, and many, many people here that really helped me in the last 2 years to form this research, but also stay sane, and thank you.